So good afternoon. I'm thrilled and excited to have the opportunity to speak to somebody who has truly revolutionized and transformed the way I look at many factors and facets of my life. I want to welcome all of the Altered State subscribers, members, but I also want to take this time to welcome any new listeners who are taking part in what's going to happen today. And I think it's important to really take this as an opportunity to really lean in. This is an individual that has transformed the way I look at my family, my faith, leadership, entrepreneurship, all of the things that I'm anchored to as a Christian, but also all of the things that I'm anchored to as I'm building out the platform. This is a man who has been here for quite some time. He's from Miami. He is the leader, and I'd like to capitalize that word, italicize it, put some glowing neon lights, because he literally leads the movement here at Brave Church. His name is Pastor David Stoker Jr. He's from Miami. I know a bit about him. I'd like to know more about him. And so with that, I am so grateful, so thankful for the opportunity that you've given me to host this episode here in God's house. Not only that, but to have it with you as a guest, as I've leaned into the movement that you're building here at Brave. And so a sincere thank you for everything you've done for me over the last 5 months, but as it relates to today. Thank you for the next 45 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tony, for having me. And just as Tony said, just welcome everyone. And want to encourage you to share this podcast with as many people as you know, because this podcast is definitely, and this organization is definitely something that is being utilized to not only grow entrepreneurs, as I've been following you and watching all that you're building, but truly you're helping people. And so I love this. I'm a fan of you, and I'm excited and honored to be here as well.
Thank you, PD. And if you'll allow me, can I call you PD?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the acronym that we use here at Brave to identify our leader. I know that you're from Miami. For those individuals that have not seen you in action, talk to me a little bit about you. Your life growing up in Miami, how you came into ministry, how you became a pastor. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, man, I could talk for the entire 45 minutes on that, but let me just, as brief as I can, I grew up in a pastor's home. My dad was a pastor here in Miami for 34 years. And great church, great marriage that him and my mom have. They just celebrated 51 years of marriage, still very much in love, and just an incredible role model. And I grew up with positive experiences in ministry, but I didn't want to be a pastor. And so I went into the business trail and ventured into business, wanted to do everything or anything but ministry, and not because of anything negative. I wanted to blaze my own trail. And so went to FIU. Like you said, I grew up here in Miami. Miami's my home. So the culture I get, the people I get, I feel like I am as Miami as anyone. In fact, I love Miami so much. I lived away from Miami for about 10 years, moved back to Miami. And, something I say often here at Brave Church is I want to die here in Miami, not tomorrow or today, many years from now. But I've really just laid my stakes in the ground that, I want to give my life to this city to see people's lives get better in this city. And so I am obsessed with Miami, with the people in Miami. I love everything about it, and our food is incredible. And the reason why I love food so much, the proof of that is why you look like that and I look like this. But, I'm working on that. But, I was 16 years old, and I was at a youth camp. And I felt God called me into ministry. And it was one of those moments, because people will say sometimes, well, how do I discover my purpose? How do I discover what God created me to do? And because that's what we all want, right? People say that the two most important days of your life are the day that you were born and then the day that you discover why. And 16 years old as I discovered why. And it was just, indescribable, but I just knew that God called me and he chose me to be a pastor and to lead people into hope, into what he has for their life. And so that was 16 years of age. And then when I got to college, that's when I just began to say, I don't want to do that. And I began this journey like many of us have, right? Where God says, hey, go here. And we say, I don't want that. And then call it rebellion or just stubborn. I ran the other way. And I just think coming back to Miami and becoming the pastor here at Brave Church and being the founder of Brave Church as it is now is really just coming full circle, where really I went on this journey to run away from God, and God said, no, I'm going to bring you back to where we started. And when you're willing to submit to me and obey me and live to your purpose, that's when your life will really begin. And that's really what I believe, is that when I came back to Miami, every experience that I had up to that point really began to take form. And, there's a story in the Bible about a guy named Jonah, right? And it's a popular story of a guy that God says, go preach to these people. And Jonah said no. And so he went the opposite way. He's on a ship. They throw him over, gets swallowed up by a whale. It's just a supernatural story. And he ends up at point A, at the original place where God had him. And I think that Miami is my Nineveh. And this is where I'm called to be. And I love it. And here we are. We're on the Altered State podcast. And that's just where we are, full circle. So that's the short story of it. There's so many other things in there. But I'm just thankful that God didn't give up on me, and that we're here.
Beautiful. For me, one of the things that allow me to gravitate and lean into you and the way you do things is not only your ability to communicate, which is at a very high level. I think what sets you apart from many others is your ability to connect. And when you connect with people is ultimately when you can get people to move in a certain direction. I think for you, coming in 5 years ago, the Brave Church was considered small, micro small. It's no longer micro small. It's a testament to your ability to make people and allow people to move in a certain direction. Other than having or hearing an explanation as to how God's hand played a role there, what was it that you did coming in that allowed you to grow this church 10x at a multiple of 10?
Yeah, I think probably seeing the need in that there were a group of people here that were great people, but they just needed strong leadership and strong vision. And I just saw that need. And, people rally behind a vision. That's why companies have vision statements and vision boards. And we here at Brave Church just needed a fresh vision of reaching our city. In fact, really what we do here at Brave Church is we equip leaders. We raise up leaders. And that 10X that you're talking about is literally a result of us empowering people to live their best lives. And what we strive to do at Brave Church is not to browbeat people and condemn people, but when people come to Brave Church, that they leave here feeling peace and they leave here feeling strength. Like those are the two things that when people leave here, I want them to feel more peace over their storm and more strength over their weaknesses. And so we just began to deliberately say, how can we take an individual, regardless of where they are, whether they're unemployed, they're a leader, they're an entrepreneur, they're a mom, they're a dad, they're a teenager, a grandparent, rich, poor, whatever ethnicity, how do we take them where they are and we put them on a journey of leadership to grow in their life? And if we can do that, then their faith will grow. And so we just have taken some intentional steps with that, just to equip leaders to help people lead wherever they are. Because like as we were just talking before we started, you're a dad, I'm a dad, our sons are the same age, 12 years old. That's leadership on you and I to raise men in our culture today. You're growing a business, you're a leader. And then you add the element of faith. And when you have faith, a part of our life, which is a big part of both of our lives, that that requires leadership as well, to lead ourselves in faith, to lead ourselves every day. And so we began to establish a leadership model, which we call Brave Life. And we have several levels of that, and we take people through this journey. What we discover is that as people begin to make some right choices, then they begin to see the right changes. And we just want to help people make the right choices so they can make the right changes. And then the third part of that is what we just hit on all the time, as you know, is consistency. Choice, change, consistency. Choice, change, consistency. And those are the things that we use, some of the elements we use to help people grow in their leadership quotient.
For me, that it resonates so much in what I'm trying to do today and the life that I lead today. My life was, I literally lived a double life. I performed at a high level for about 25 years where I led and commercialized a lot of, pharmaceutical assets. But at 5:01 p.m., I literally then managed my life with drugs and alcohol. Today, my life is transformed to a level where I never would have imagined that something so chaotic, something so dark, something so anxiety-driven can now be used to help others. That, to me, just really qualifies how Jesus is the Redeemer, right? And as I'm building this platform and really building the foundational components of what the brand represents, the brand story, all of the great things that go with the brand. I'm sometimes faced with the fact that entrepreneurship is lonely, right? And entrepreneurship, it's also empowering. But at the same time, when you're alone, and it's in those moments where you're alone where there's warfare going on, at least for me, right? Because I'm out there trying to position the brand to do good and to help others and to allow people to live the better version of themselves. However, the warfare sometimes takes a hold of me. For a man like me, how would you guide me, coach me on this whole component of entrepreneurship when those things get in the way?
Yeah, man, that's such a good question. And I think that answer to that question is like a daily discipline, where every single day you face and I face, and those of all of you that are watching right now, you face your own warfare mechanism. Yours may be different than mine may be different than yours, but we face that. And just several weeks ago, in fact, I spoke a message that is really like my leadership mantra. It's what I preached it, but it's what I live my life on. And it's really two pieces. And the first thing is this, is as you are an entrepreneur and as you're growing a brand, you're growing a business, you're growing a family, you're growing in your own personal development, what I find is that way too many of us, we trade what we want most for what we want right now. And I find that is that, it's like, for example, when it comes to health and fitness, I want a cupcake right now. But what I really want the most is to be healthy, right? And many times, entrepreneurs, business people, I meet with business people all the time here at Brave Church, and then university students, and then people as I counsel them in their marriages and relationships. It's amazing how like the human tendency is we trade what we want most away for what we want right now. That's like that flesh aspect, like instant gratification. And really, when I spoke that message like 3 weeks ago, the title of it was don't settle. And that's the thing, is many times we settle. And we settle because of a lot of factors: defeat, failure, rejection, abandonment, things from our childhood, things from our past. And then we overcompensate for those. Then we have success, and even sometimes success can cause us to settle at our current level of success. And what I've seen is that I've had to constantly evaluate, am I trading what I want most, the marathon versus the sprint, for what I want right now? And then the second part of this equation that I just really try to live my life by is simply this, is that we make our choices, but then our choices make us. Is every single decision that we make throughout our day is defining something for our future. And so many times people will say, well, here's what I want in my life. Here's my dreams. Here's my ambitions. Here's what I want to build. But are your choices conducive to building that? Because you and I, we make our choice. We made a decision, and we chose to be here right now. But then this decision is going to make something for us. So realizing that when I choose A, then A goes to work for me. When I choose B, B goes to work in my future. What is it that we're choosing? What is it that we're sending into our future that's going to build something out there? It all depends on what we're doing right here. And so we make our choices, but then our choices make us. And so I would say that those two things, and then obviously the aspect of God. And I know there's probably people that are watching here that you're not a person of faith. And let me just say this, like that's cool and that's great. But when it comes to my life, what I've seen is the element of faith is something that has been so powerful for me, because you take our human ingredients and then you realize that, at least for me, that there's still something missing. At the best of us, there's still something missing. And so that third part, which is the biggest part of the equation to me, is just God. And then you ask God, God, help me to not trade what I want most for what I have right now. God, help me to be obedient in my choices. And God, help me to make the right choices. I've just have discovered that God's ways are bigger than my ways. And I need help and wisdom and guidance in those things. And so those three elements, Tony, are what I would say define any entrepreneur to help them get to the next level.
Excellent. I want to piggyback on a comment you said and shared. It's having the ability to pivot from a short game to the long game. And you've shared that in service. It's something that I subscribe to. And for me, it's about being resilient in the face of adversity. For me, when you look at how I prepare for the day, I'm very routine oriented. And it starts with the 5-5-5 that I started, that I learned here, right? 5 minutes of scripture, 5 minutes of prayer, 5 minutes of worship. And then obviously bring in some motivational videos on YouTube, all the things that really jazz me up. But this resilience component has really allowed me to continue to push through despite the adversity. And so one of the scripture that I turn to help me move past it, and it comes from the book of James, 1:2-4, which reads, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you are involved in various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance." And so despite the fact that I know that there's going to be hiccups along the road, that's going to only impact my short game, right? My short game determines how fast I get from here to there. But if I'm really anchored to the long game, I know that the journey will be fruitful. I often say that the learning comes when you take an opportunity to look to the side. You need to look up. You need to make sure that you're anchored to the purpose, right? What's your interpretation of resilience in the midst of this COVID environment, as you're leading young men and young women, you're leading the congregation? How do you describe resilience?
Yeah, I would just say developing a spirit of not quitting. We in my home with my two kids, we have this motto that I don't know where I came up with it, but I remember, I think it just came on me. But I remember my daughter, who's 14 now, she was maybe 4 years old, and she was on her first soccer team. She didn't want to go. She was crying. Maybe she was 5. And she said, "Dad, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go." And she had been at all the practices, but now it came time for the game, and she didn't want to go. And I've actually got a picture that she was getting ready to go out to the field, and my hand is just on her back, her upper back, and I'm pushing it. There was a photographer that caught it, and he said it was such a beautiful picture of a father just not pushing, but leading her out into the field.
Beautiful.
And I said to her as she was going out, I said, "Stalkers aren't quitters." That's my last name, Stalker. Stalkers aren't quitters. And that has just become a mantra in our home, that in any time where we feel like quitting, quitting is not an option. I feel like resilience is, because, every one of us are going to have storms in our life, things that we weren't expecting, traumas, people that have hurt us, abandoned us, whatever. And we all have those things to overcome. And I really feel like we have two options there. We either quit or we become resilient. And I think resilience is not developing a hard heart. Resilience is not losing your compassion. Resilience is not becoming bitter. Resilience is not becoming angry at what happened or whatever failed. Resilience is saying, no matter what, I'm going to maintain who I am, my identity, and I'm not going to quit. Quitting is not an option. And you used the word that we talked about earlier, and this is grit. Like, resilience is grit, right? Like, when I hear the word grit, I just hear, like, at times it's dirty. At times you get mud on your face. You get mud on your hands. It's not sexy. It's not cool. It's not Instagrammable. No one's Instagramming, on their story, grit. What they celebrate is the empire, but no one celebrates the grit that built the empire. Grit, to me, and resilience is behind the scenes when no one is looking. You were talking a little bit earlier about, being an entrepreneur is lonely at times. And pushing through loneliness requires grit and resilience. And it all comes back down to this word settling. I refuse to settle. Like, I may be here and I may have gotten kicked down and it brought me to here, but I'm coming back up here. I think that is the resilience. It's the ability to rebound, not at the level you were, but at the next level.
When I speak to individuals who are part of the fellowship here, and we talk about PD, and we talk about why it's so important to follow PD, I think there's many reasons. I think for me, one of the most profound is the relatability component, right? You can, as a person not in ministry, I could still relate to what it is that's happened in your life. I want to just pivot a little bit. You talk about hardship, you talk about resilience, grit, all the things that I think and I know in knowing you and in how you speak and what you teach. These are foundational components of who you are. Talk to me a little bit about something that's impacted your life, and despite that, you've been able to push through, persevere, and really, move your family, your kids to where they are today.
Yeah. Again, I think, all of us have gone through things, and 2019 was that time for me. As we were talking earlier before we came on camera, you would ask, hey, if you want to go there, we can go there. And so this is the first time since 2019, January 6th, that I've actually talked about this publicly. And so 2019 was a year where I went through a divorce, and it was extremely painful for me. And obviously being a pastor, my life is in public. And so when your private life becomes public and when you can't control, that aspect of it, it really requires a magnitude of trust in God. And also it requires an insurmountable amount of humbleness. And 2019 was a storm that, to be honest, we've all had these thoughts before, right? That we just, I just want to quit, right? Like, this is really, really tough. And I can tell you, growing up, I've been blessed. I've been, like I said, I come from a great family, a great home, and an amazing support system. And being a pastor at a church, I have an amazing staff. My team just makes me look good. You talk about how great Brave Church is. Just the team, man. They're phenomenal. So I'm surrounded by a lot of great people. But in those moments when you're in a storm, it's amazing how isolated you can feel, how lonely you can feel. And I can tell you that 2019 was probably the only time that I've ever wanted to quit anything in my life. But God. And God had the right people around me at the right time just to help me live what I had preached. Because it's one thing, Tony, to stand on the stage and say something to people, encourage them. It's another thing than when you have to live it. You know what I mean? And I've walked many people through divorces. I've walked many people through tragedies in their home and their family. But this was really the first traumatic experience in my life. And to this degree where it touched what I loved the most. Because I'm just a family guy. And so, but I think having the right people around you that are saying the right things to you, I had to look in my circle. And some people I had to remove from my circle. I want to encourage those of you that are watching, not everyone that's in your life should have permission to speak into your life. Some people you can't remove from your life, but maybe you could turn their volume down. And even there were certain family members, like I don't want to remove family members from my life, but I had to turn the volume of their voice down, and other people had to turn the volume of their voice up. And the right people around you that remind you who you are, not who you feel like you are. And I feel like sometimes people lose their grit and their resilience because they feel like a failure. You know, when you go through a failed marriage, you know, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. If the marriage ends, it's still a failure. And I felt like a failure. I felt like, how am I worthy to lead people when this has happened in my life? And it's humiliating. You know, it's like crazy. But I had the right people in my life to remind me, no, you are a pastor. You are called by God. You know, just because you had a failure doesn't mean you are a failure. Just because someone walked out on you doesn't mean that we've walked out on you. And I think the right people, the relationship with God, and just then remembering your identity was what was so huge to help me get through that. To where, Tony, I could tell you, storms and trials, tough situations, if you are able to be resilient, you come out of them better. You come out of them still with maybe the cracks or the bruises or the scars. Many people are afraid to talk about the scars in their life, and especially in church world, right? Because like in church world, and especially me being a pastor, right? Like, it's like you've got to be perfect. And I think we're way beyond that in our culture to know that, man, pastors go through pain too, you know? And, but I think in faith, and the reason why so many people have been like burned out by faith, and like, maybe even some of you, as you heard that I'm a pastor, like, oh, great, he's going to push religion. That's not what I'm doing at all. But I think that some people have been burned out by religion and faith, and because they've seen like so many fakes and phonies, and it's like, man, dude, why are you trying to act like you're perfect? And I think really what I'm describing is like we love to hide our scars, but we shouldn't be ashamed of our scars. Our scars actually show us what we've come through. They show people, look, I was hurt, man, I was cut, I was broken. And this scar is a reminder. Like you have probably scars all over. You have scars all over my body. We also have scars in our heart and in our minds and in our emotions. And those scars remind us, man, I was hurt. I was broken. I was damaged. But, man, I persevered. That word endurance, man, just like endurance that you read from James, is really a trademark of my life. So now when I talk with people that are going through divorce, I can relate to them. Where before, like, I remember several years ago, I'm sorry, I'm real wordy, that I was talking with a guy who was going through a bad divorce. And I remember it was like after a year inside me, I was like, bro, like this is before I went through my thing. I was like, dude, this guy just needs to man up. Like, my gosh, how bad can it be? You know what I mean? Now coming through it, I've got so much more compassion, so much more understanding. And I think that's what tough times do at times in those seasons is they actually make you a better person if you are willing to become resilient, learn from it, and use your pain as a purpose to help people.
You know, I'm so anchored to that because for me, when I look at current state and I look at previous state, past state, and I look at what the Lord is doing with me today, and he's literally allowing me the opportunity to communicate and to expose my cracks, which, by the way, to me, they're beautiful. It's like artwork, to help others. And I never would have imagined that I would be able to take something that was so anxiety driven, so chaotic, so dark, because I was literally in the abyss. People would say, "Why do you keep doing this?" And I would self-admitted would say, "I want to see how far I can go." That's the mind of a sick person. Today I can relate to those that want to do the same, right? And so that's the reason why my calling today is to help destigmatize addiction, destigmatize mental health, because it's not about, to your point, manning up, snap out of it. There's more than that, a lot more than that. And so, thank you for that. That's that whole relatability that I was talking about. And I appreciate that so much about you. As I was praying and preparing for this dialogue, this conversation, praying a lot, and something that I've been struggling with because I'm so anchored to building the brand. And the brand is about helping people. But we live in a society where people are so sensitive. I don't know what's happened in this country. And I don't even want to start to talk about that, because we'll be here for hours. But the minute that you talk about faith, Jesus, the Lord, for me, and I hate to live by these vanity metrics. I need to do a better job of that, self-admitted. I need to do a much better job. But I've been reluctant, and so I'm going to tell on myself here. I've been reluctant to say how deeply anchored, deeply anchored. This anchor does not move to Jesus. And I've never really had an opportunity to share it, literally on this stage, but on the stage of social. Guide me, PD. How would you? I'm not alone here. I'm not unique. There's others that are struggling through this. You talked about it in our discipleship meetings and all the things that we want to do for Miami. How do you push forward? How do you guide people like me that are faced with the same issue?
Yeah, man, it's such a good question. I think that, again, to your point, you could pull back a layer here that's happening in our nation, and how deep do you want to go in it? But I think ultimately, what we're seeing is, in our culture today, more than ever, while people are crying out, let's just all get along, let's all be acceptant of each other, that is the surface level. But I think you get just a few inches deeper, people are so afraid of what they don't know. And I think when it comes to faith and being a businessman or a person of influence, and then you've got a brand, we don't want to, or we're afraid, or we don't want to push people off when it comes to faith. And it's because in our culture, we've created this thing that if I don't agree with you, then I shut you down and you have no value to me. And that is so, where does that train of thought end? Because we are all different. There's not two people alive who have the same fingerprints. So we are so different. There is no way that you and I, even with all of our similarities, would agree on everything. And so there are certain topics that have become those things where they're on the surface, where it's if you believe this, then you must be a part of that. And what it is, it's a generalization where we've created in our minds that all people of XYZ are like this, and all people like this are like that, and all people like this are this way, and all Christians are this way. And I think because that is what culture has put on the forefront, then that makes people like you and I, who love people, who want to help people, who do embrace all people, it makes it a challenge, because what's on the surface on the news and mainstream media is that all Christians are fill in the blank. And so I think it's so important that men like you, who you have influence, and other business people, that you do make it known. I'm a person of faith, and my faith is an anchor that cannot be moved. But even if you disagree with that, we still have value with each other. You may drive an Infiniti. Someone may drive a Toyota. You have different preferences of cars, but that doesn't mean that the individual in the car is different and that you can't accept them and you can't love them. And so I think that, for example, here at Brave Church, we have people that come here that are Hindu, that are Muslim, that are atheist. Someone messaged me 3 weeks ago from our Sunday night service who's a complete atheist and said, I never felt like I'd be welcome in a church. I just feel welcome. This was like an amazing experience. And he's still coming every week. I messaged him just this morning, hey, how are you doing? And he's just checking out the claims of faith. And someone had invited him to come to Brave. And I just thought, man, I wonder what would have happened if someone had been afraid to invite him to church. I think, Tony, with that too, is that people just have an understanding of what church isn't. And they haven't really dived into, well, what is church? The church has evolved. People have been hurt by church. And so they think, well, I got hurt by a church, so all churches are. I got hurt by a pastor, so all pastors are. I got judged by a Christian, so all Christians are judgmental. And so, I just feel, and I said something this past Sunday night in our 6 p.m. service, and I just said this, or I think it was last Sunday, we are called to tell people about our faith, but we don't preach using our words. We preach using our life. And I think you can be a witness to what God has done in your life, not by preaching and telling people you're going to go to hell, and you got to turn or burn. That's like in our minds, like what Christians do. But I think them just seeing your life and on a daily being consistent, not perfect, but being consistent. Like, hey, Tony, man, something's different about you. Like, what's up with your life? Like, how are you doing what you do? And you have that resilience, you have that strength. Like, what is it? What's the ingredients? And then you talk to him about, I'm a disciplined person. I'm a routine person. I like to do this. And I have an anchor in my faith who is Jesus Christ. You put all the ingredients into that cake. And then all of a sudden someone's like, I want that. So can you teach me how to be more disciplined? Can you teach me how to be more routine? Can you teach me how to be consistent? And talk to me about this faith thing. How does that play into your life? I think that's what's missing in our workplace is that people really need to hear less words and they need to see more life.
Excellent. I know that you're very busy. I want to be respectful of time, but I want to say thank you. Every time that I hear you speak, every time I have an interaction with you, I take many nuggets and I apply them to my life. And so I'm indebted to you. I'm indebted to this church. But I want to say thank you for allowing me to have this platform for dialogue and communication here in God's house. And so with that, I want to thank all the listeners, all of the new listeners, to continue signing in, continue leaning into Brave Church Miami. This is where change happens. And so with that, have a good afternoon.